Come on out to Mississauga, it's the greatest place around. Where on a quiet evening you can watch the sun go down. And if you should need a friend, there are plenty to be found. That's why everybody loves that good old Mississauga.
Hello, and thank you for joining us here on Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. Please send in your questions to history@heritagemississauga.org as we explore the fascinating stories of Mississauga together on the program. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. As part of this program, we are exploring moments, memories, and milestones from the past 50 years with past and present civic leaders. On this week's episode, we are excited to be joined by former City of Mississauga Councillor Steve Mahoney as we explore his personal perspectives of moments and milestones for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Steve served on City Council from 1978 to 1987 and also served at the provincial and federal levels of government over his lengthy career in public service, all while calling Mississauga home. Thank you, Steve, for joining us here on the program. Really delighted that you'll take the time to wander down some memory lane with us.
Well, my pleasure, Matthew. Nice to have the opportunity of doing so.
Well, you've had a long career in not only local politics, I know as a councillor, but your career has gone beyond into different levels of government, but always Mississauga goes with you, I think.
Yep. Well, that's for sure. It's been a long run, and I've enjoyed it tremendously.
Yeah. What are your connections to the city of Mississauga? When did Mississauga become home to you?
Well, we moved here in I think around 70.
Okay.
We got married in 69. We moved. We had some temporary housing for a couple of years until we finally bought our first home in 76, which was on Tallmass Crescent.
Okay.
So that's when I sort of consider making Mississauga home when we purchased that first home.
Right.
But we had been here since we got married in 69, and and it lived in a few different places over those first 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Do you remember what drew you to Mississauga in the first place?
Do I remember what?
What drew you to Mississauga in the first place?
I think the cost. My parents lived, excuse me, on Princess Margaret Boulevard,
okay,
in Etobicoke, which was considered high rent in those days. It's certainly high rent today. In fact, I think the home my folks bought, they paid $37,000 for it up on Princess Margaret after selling their home in the Kingsway down at Bloor and Royal York for the same amount.
Right.
But that home today is worth about $3 million. So there's a little bit of a difference. But we moved out here basically looking for something that was affordable to raise a family and get on with things.
Right. And Air Mills obviously became your home in time, and
yeah, very much
today.
so. Very much so. All the times in the Bread and Honey Festival parades, and the convertible car next door, owned by Ross Harlow, which I remember boiling over one parade, and I had to pull over because it was going to explode on me. But those Bread and Honey events were pretty terrific, and I wound up becoming the president of the Tempo, the Erin Mills Homeowners Association.
Right.
It was actually called the Erin Mills People's Organization, but that sounded a little communistic, so we called it the Homeowners Association to be a little friendlier.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask. I know you ran or you were elected in 1978. Your son, who I interviewed earlier as the current ward councillor for Ward 8,
Right.
You talk about a long family connection here to Ward 8 Mississauga. I kudos to you to your family, but he had fond recollections of a election a bus, a van.
Oh, no, it was Yeah, that was the first time I ran in 1976 against Fred Hooper.
Okay.
And we'd rented this Winnebago for the campaign and drove all over the place. And I'll never forget pulling up in front of Fred's home and singing the campaign song, which was "Vote, vote, vote for Steve Mahoney. He is sure to win the day. Oh, we'll get a garbage can and we'll put Fred Hooper in, and we'll never see his face anymore." Anyway, we sang that quite loud over a microphone that was hooked up to the Winnebago, and Fred came out, and his family were pretty disgusted with us. And anyway, he wound up changing the. I lost that election to Fred. There were two other people running. I came second and fairly close, but still lost. And Fred changed the boundaries so that I wouldn't run against him the next time. And the next time was 1978 when I ran.
Yeah.
And it was me and Jim Murray
Okay.
running against each other for a guy who I think has grown to become a very close personal friend over the years, and thanks me every time I see him for defeating him that year by a whopping 150 votes, I think it was. It was pretty tight.
Did the Winnebago sway the day? Is that
No, I didn't do the Winnebago
No.
again. We had different methods of getting around and that kind of thing. So I think Jim had a Winnebago, and I wound up in it, sharing a cocktail or two at the end of the canvassing circuit with him, which was kind of funny.
Very different, very different. You don't see the Winnebagos out on the streets these days, do you?
No, you don't.
So Mississauga, your roots going 1969, 1970. So we talk about, we're looking back on the 50 years of the city. You've certainly seen all of those 50 years here and that evolution of the city in over time. I'm wondering if you can reflect on some of those early memories of what Mississauga was like when you first got here, or, thinking back on those formative years as you're raising a young family in the community, kind of how the city's evolved through your eyes in those early years.
Well, I'll never forget Jerry Crean was a good friend and lived in Etobicoke in the Kingsway. And I wound up at his home for some reason without a vehicle. I can't remember why. And he decided to drive me home. So he drove me out to my new home on Tallmass Crescent. And he could not believe the distance, number one. He thought we were going to Kitchener. And the fact that there was nobody there. There was no housing. It was all open fields and that kind of thing. So that was quite remote. And I remember those days, and I remember our kids always going across Winston Churchill to the other side where there wasn't a home even thought of, and playing in the forest with the mud and everything else. But even in town, I can also remember discovering a forest that was going to be destroyed around Mavis Road and Burnhamthorpe. Okay. So there was no housing in there either. And I wound up on the front page of the Mississauga News, standing with 1 foot up on a log and holding a brush hook, that I discovered this forest that needed protecting from development.
Okay.
Well, that's now, of course, a major housing development. It's taken place. I mean, I've seen all the growth. It's been really terrific. The most recent growth, I can't say that I had much to do with, although in the early days we would have been involved in setting the zoning and that kind of thing for a lot of the housing, that the high rise that's there, most of which was designed and originally built by Marco Muzzo and the Aaron Mills Group.
Yep.
And they sold off to different people and that kind of thing. So it's been a real mushrooming story. I think the population of this city back in the early days was around 200,000 people. And they were spread out. You had the amalgamation of Cooksville and the various locations. So they were spread out all over the place. And in the beginning, nothing in Erin Mills that didn't even exist. We've grown from that 200,000 up to, I guess, pretty close to 1 million. What's 800,000 or so today, and it's really remarkable.
Yeah, and not ceasing either, right? The growth is going to continue, so
it's all going up, of course, but
yeah.
that's the way of the future, I think.
Are there, and maybe we've already touched on this, but if you can think of how this city has evolved through your eyes, are there specific changes that you've seen that were significant or impactful on the growth of the city? I think of maybe Square One, but the downtown core and City Hall. I don't know. I'm just are there things that jump into your mind?
Well, City Hall for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in the original City Hall, which was over at Highway 10 and what's the name of that street?
Robert Speck Parkway.
Yeah, Robert Speck.
Yeah.
We did all of our wining and dining at what was that restaurant called? Right in the corner was. I should remember it. It was called Vodka Martini. I know that. But in any event, that's where we'd always meet before planning. Russ Edmonds and I would go over and have a cocktail and sit down and discuss the agenda before the planning committee, which I was chairman of for 7 years that I was there. And so we saw a lot of growth from those days. The new City Hall was quite interesting, though. It was I think a real stepping stone of age growth. It really shot us into the spotlight in terms of being a fixture that you could relate to being Mississauga, aside from Square One. So it was always Square One was what you thought of, people thought of when they thought of Mississauga. But the new City Hall kind of took its place. And I see it today. It's just phenomenal what's happened. And the activities that go on in that square are really tremendous.
Are there, like, reflecting your time in council, and I know that you had a lengthy career after your time on municipal council, but are there things that you say drive by today and you're like, I remember having a hand in that? Is there something that jumps out at you?
I guess a lot of different things do. Really, the always went to the Streetsville Santa Claus Parade. That was something I always participated in. The opening of the new City Hall with Andrew and Fergie was a big event. The things that I personally had a hand in, whether it was as chairman of planning or as the local councillor. In those days, our council wards were like war zones. You didn't dare interfere in another person's ward.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably a little bit like that today, but it was very much like that in my early day. Probably the biggest memory for me would be the train derailment.
Right.
That was quite phenomenal. I was actually the acting mayor when that train went off, and Hazel was out of town. I'm not even sure if she was in the country, but she was definitely out of town. And they took me over, and I went down with wearing great big boots to what was the Rec and Parks building.
Yes.
And as I'm walking around the parking lot, all of a sudden, I'm sinking below my knees and then below my hips. And now I'm in right up to my armpits and still sinking. And the staff were grabbing a rope and throwing it to me and hauling me out of there. And they took me back to the trailer where all the emergency people were working, and immediately stripped me down naked and hosed me to death because they were worried about whatever was in that hole that I had fallen into. It was chemicals of some sort from the train derailment. So that was quite a historic. And I remember going home wearing a firefighter's outfit because that was all I could wear. My clothes were shot, I walked into the house and the kids were there, and I walk in as Joe Fireman, and they all had a good laugh at that.
I've heard countless stories and recorded them over of the train derailment. I have never heard that story before.
Yeah, yeah. No, that was quite something.
I talk about an education under fire, and that's a good pun on words. But your first term as councillor, and here you are as acting mayor at a train derailment.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, the night it went off, I remember sitting at home. We were laying in bed, and we saw this massive light coming, and I thought, my God, I better go see it. So I called my brother-in-law who lived around the corner from me, and we got the car and went over there, and we got up to Mavis Road and Dundas, and another explosion hit, and the stuff was falling down on top of us. We were literally diving over the edge of the road and rolling down the hill, to not knowing what the heck was going on. So, that was a bit of a scary time.
And you didn't picture that when you got elected, I guess.
What?
You didn't picture that when you got elected.
No, I sure as heck didn't. But I think the most amazing thing was of the train derailment was when we had evacuated so many people in the city. We'd evacuated out to Erin Mills Parkway, basically. So everything west of Erin Mills, where my family was still occupied by the families.
Yeah.
This was about a week in to the thing, maybe 4 or 5 days. And I can remember being in the gymnasium at the high school at the corner of Erin Mills and Dundas, with all the people in sleeping bags and trying to keep themselves and their kids warm and figure out what they were going to do and where they were going to go. And I got the call, and the call was, get your family and get them the heck out of there. So I had to hurry home. That was after I remember stopping at the seniors' home on the kitty corner to the high school.
Okay.
And helping to unload a number of people from there into buses and that to get them moving. And meanwhile, I had managed to. I don't think I had a cell phone. I don't remember, but I managed to contact Katie and said, "You better get packed up. You got to move." And then I went home and got them out, and they went to my brother's place in Toronto. So they were safe. But I remember driving around after that, because here I am, Margaret Marland and I are sitting in the mayor's office answering the phones. The switchboard had closed, basically, they had left.
Right.
The phone was ringing directly into Hazel's office, and we're answering the telephones. And Margaret and I are sort of the controlees, if you will, of City Hall and everything that was going on. So it was really quite remarkable.
I said that had to be a bit eerie too, being in City Hall, and it's probably a ghost town in its own right.
Well, everything was a ghost town. And I remember driving out of there, and I went up to what is now the golf course, up to the top end, west end of the city.
Yeah.
And if you ever play that course and you get out on the I forget what number it is, I think number 6, where you're way up high and you can look out and see the city in front of you. But in those days, you'd look out and see nothing.
Right.
And it was all evacuated. And, it was quite eerie to be the only soul in town.
Yeah, I know we've recorded a number of people with reflections on coming back in, but certainly one of those formative memories that, shaped the city, but shaped the people who went through it too. It's obviously stuck with you all these years. And
yeah, it did. Well, I remember one story of going in the back of an ambulance to get to some of the animals in the Credit Woodlands who had been left behind in their homes.
Yep.
And they were in there for a week. There were dogs that were, pretty vicious animals. There was, give me some food. And we went in and got some of them out and took people in to get their animals out. Yep. So they could then, save them. Yep. So there were lots of really interesting stories that came out of that time.
And also community rallying together, I imagine, as well. And
Yeah, well, very much so. There was so few complaints. People were just thrilled and delighted at the way the whole thing was handled. Hazel was truly amazing. But there were a lot of us involved in it. Margaret and I very much involved in keeping things flowing as much as we could out of City Hall.
now, well, switch gears a little bit and look at kind of the and this might be an endless list. And over your time, not as only as counselor, but as representing this community at different levels of government. The list of organizations and groups and clubs, you've already mentioned the homeowners association, but it must have been countless in terms of who you've been involved with. But I'm just wondering if you can maybe reflect a little bit on some of those organizations or clubs that you were connected to that really had were intrinsic to the building of a Mississauga identity.
Yeah, sure. The kinsman. So I was actually appointed as an honorary Kinnett.
Okay.
I think I'm the only man who has been officially appointed as an honorary Kinnett. And some of those ladies are still around. In fact, one of them often visits a neighbor across the road from where we live now. And but the kinsmen and the Kinnetts were tremendously active and involved in the community. I think a lot more than they are today, but I honestly can't say I know that for sure.
Yeah,
because I'm not directly involved with them now. But in those days, it seemed like everybody was heavily involved, and all the people in Erin Mills, particularly, were heavily involved.
yeah. When you reflect on and we've already mentioned Hazel and obviously Margaret Marland and think of those people that you've connected with over your time here with Mississauga. And again, I realize this is a big picture question because of the amount of time you've been in Mississauga, but the individuals that kind of have helped build Mississauga, if you can think of maybe some of those giants whose shoulders you stand upon, of who shaped the city. I must admit that Natalie Hart, when asked the same question, brought your name forward. So it's just wondering if you could think of some of those that have kind of helped shape the city in your eyes.
Well, a lot of the people that I served with, Rudy Skajerum was heavily involved. Of course, old Harold Kennedy was just an amazing guy. I'll never forget being with Paul Fox, who was the president of University of Toronto in Mississauga in those days, and we had an event at his home, and Harold and Margaret and Rudy and I were there, and afterwards we all left. We'd had a couple of probably shouldn't admit this, but what the heck. They can't fire me now. a couple of snaps too many, and we were looking for Harold and we couldn't find him. We went outside, and it was pitch black and quite late at night. We could hear him singing, and he was singing, "I've been working on the railroad." He would climbed up on a bloody tree, and he was sitting up in the first limb of the tree singing, "I've been working on the railroad." So we had to get him down from the tree. And that was quite an interesting night. But he was such a tremendous community builder and city builder, and I don't think ever really got the credit. His brother Doug, of course, got a lot of credit. He was an MPP,
Yep,
and very successful. And of course, the Kennedy family before them. You've got Kennedy Road and Tompkin Road, and Tom Kennedy was, I never knew him, but apparently was quite a tremendous guy, and helped to build the city.
yep.
But, I think of a lot of the staff as well, who were Russ Edmonds, did a tremendous job as planning commissioner for many years. Oh God, our city manager, forgive me, his name escapes me at the moment, but what a tremendous guy he was too. Our fire chief was really a novel character. He'd come before us with a great big laugh and a pat your back and shake your hand and then ask you for a whole whack of money. And of course, you had to give it to them.
Was that Gord Bentley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was before Gord.
Oh, before Gord. Okay. Yeah.
Before Gord Bentley, the fire chief back in 78,
Okay.
9, in there. Gord Bentley, of course, was around too, and he was a junior staffer at that time, and then became chief, and he was a tremendous chief. So there's lots of those folks, lots of people on the police who are tremendous, and of course we served at the region as well.
Yeah.
We had a lot of we had Rick Frost up at the region, was a great contributor to the region appeal. Some people questioned his contributions to the city of Mississauga, but I didn't. I thought he was good. Frank Bean became chairman, and Frank had been a councillor for many years in Mississauga. Did a tremendous job and left a real history at the region and in the city in Ward 3.
Yeah.
So there's lots of good folks.
I'm thinking too, I mean, under your guidance too, would have seen the early parks and rec developments with the community centers, and you had a hand in some of those. Jerry Love and his team with parks.
And Ian Scott.
Yeah.
Jerry Love. And I drove by it just the other day. What used to be the community center in Erin Mills is now a construction site.
Yeah.
It's basically been torn down, and they're rebuilding it for at least the third go around,
right,
of that particular project. But it was, it was tremendous when we opened it, and we used to have all our tempo meetings there, and my meetings, and I even had, I think I had a few elections celebrations in that hall. One I never forget, when my father came and spoke at the meeting, and everyone, after he finished speaking, standing up there with his hands on his hips and not really saying much good about me, but saying a lot of good things about the city. And people saying, I think we elected the wrong Mahoney. We should have put Bill in office. But anyway, it was quite an active place.
Well, we have spent a good deal of our time with this program and chatting, looking back, and well, we should. Mississauga has a story to celebrate, and you've had a hand in that as well, and reflecting on that. But if we could put our prognostication hat on for a moment, if you could have a wish for the city looking forward to the next 50 years, I'm wondering what it is that you would think or wish for the city as it moves into the future.
Well, for the next 50 years, they should keep me around, don't you think?
We need the reflection on where we've come from to guide us moving forward.
Well, that might be asking a bit much to last that long, but I mean, what are we, the third largest city in the province?
Third in the province, seventh in the country, I believe.
I was going to say sixth, but maybe it's seventh in the country.
Yeah.
And we've never really, until fairly recently, we never really got the recognition of being a city as such.
Yeah.
We were always part of the West End of Toronto. There are some people who still look at us that way, but in reality, we are a bona fide municipality standing on our own 2 feet. Contrary to some of the latest media reports from Carolyn and others, they're scrambling about should they pay this or not. And looking to the province for more leadership in Mississauga, which I think is needed.
Yep.
But we're clearly a city that has a place in the history of the province of Ontario and the country of Canada. But the province of Ontario, when you look at the makeup of the population today, I mean, we clearly would resemble the nature of the entire Canadian population.
Yes. The
mix of people that we have from everywhere in the world who generally get along, despite some of the news reports that Katie and I watch that say there's been a shooting here or there, a stabbing here or there. That's big city stuff, and that's bound to happen. There are people with different energies and different views. And I think the media coverage is greater today than it was. I mean, what did we have? We had Cable 10,
Yeah.
and we had the Mississauga News and the Mississauga Times in my early days.
Yep.
But all they would cover would be local stuff, and no one else picked up on it. So they'd write a news story about the council budget or something like that, and it would appear in their free handout newspapers, but it never hit the Toronto Star the way it does today. Yeah. So there's big changes in that regard. I think it's a city we can be extremely proud of. I think the growth that has been led obviously tremendously by Hazel, but in reality, during Hazel's time, we did it with zero budget increases every year, which was unrealistic looking at it today. And today they're paying the price for that. Yeah. They're now looking at substantial budget increases, and I don't know that there's any real way around that. But having said that, we were kind of proud to keep it at zero as long as we could.
Yep.
During those days.
Yeah, I was going to say, it is about building a community, and you have to make decisions as you go along. And, as you're one of the hands steering the ship, and I'm sure the decisions were never taken lightly.
No, that's for sure. We had interesting fights at budget committee. And of course, we'd come in at zero, and then the region appeal would come in at 7 or 8. So we always had fairly serious problems there. But what's interesting now is Brampton is basically the same size as Mississauga, and yet they pay 35% of the regional budget, and Mississauga picks up the balance.
Yep.
That's just got to change. Yep. I mean, it should be 50-50, frankly, at this stage of the game. Yep. And I would be pushing very hard for that if I were in a position to do so.
Well, I imagine that's part of the conversation moving forward as both municipalities and Caledon as well mature and evolve with increases in population. But I just, thank you for spending some time. We could do this for hours and hours, I know, and I really appreciate lending some of your insights on the story of our city, and just congratulations to your family. I was speaking to another one the other day. I referred to. Perhaps your family, but maybe Kennedy's as well, as kind of those first families of Mississauga politics. There's been a Mahoney on the steering the ship, or helping steer the ship for over 40 years of our 50-year history of Mississauga, and I think that's something to be proud of. And I know Matt's in the seat now, but he reflected greatly on you and Katie's time before him. And I think the community really holds that dear to our hearts in terms of your family and their continued leadership.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I think he's doing a tremendous job. Very proud of him.
Yeah.
And the work he's doing.
And I know, again, that comes from that, probably what you instilled, that idea of building communities and making the place you live a desirable place to stay. And
well, of course, it's nice of you to say that I instilled that, but I don't know that I thought I was instilling that. I was just trying to survive in a political world, which at times was a little difficult. But and of course, I kept on striving and pushing forward, running for MPP and winning, and then going for MP with Prime Minister Chrétien, who to this day is one of my closest friends. And in fact, I have a note sitting right beside me on the desk from him that he responded to me just recently. So I've had Mississauga has been the base from which I grew, but I must tell you that the greatest thrill I think I had was serving in the federal cabinet and serving with Jean Chrétien and many of the other wonderful people there. And the respect that was shown by Mississauga for achieving that was well appreciated.
Well, like I said, you represented us with class and brought that Mississauga forward. I think you were one of the ones that helped elevate Mississauga in, beyond our local sphere. And with that, thank you for how you served, for the levels you served in, but for what you continue to serve. You're part of the story of this place. And with that, as a resident here, I thank you for what you've done.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great story.
It
We'll
is
look forward to seeing it grow on from here.
wonderful. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for spending some time with us here. And thank you also to long-serving former City of Mississauga Councillor Steve Mahoney for sharing his memories, moments, and milestones with us for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and we will see you on future episodes here with Heritage Mississauga.